Have you ever spent 10 minutes searching the house for something like a set of keys or a pair of spectacles or a book, only to realise that it's been in your hand or on top of your head or directly in front of you the entire time? Or perhaps you've walked past a close friend on a busy street and your mind so occupied with your own thoughts that their face simply just didn't register until they stepped right into your path and spoke your name. When our attention is focused inwards, the world around us can become surprisingly faint. And we look at our surroundings, but we don't always see them. Our minds fill the space with what we expect to find, leaving us temporarily blind to what is standing directly in front of us. We often think of revelation as something loud and dramatic, a sudden parting of the clouds, a flash of light, a voice from the heavens. Yet many of our deepest moments of clarity happen in a much quieter register. They arrive when the fog of our preconception clears and we suddenly recognise what has been there all along. Welcome. Welcome to Wednesday Wandering with me, Kate Field. Wondering about things that are fascinating and interesting and spiritual, and not just wandering off. I do hope that you are well, and thank you so much for joining me today. This week falls on the 22nd of July, the feast of Saint Mary Magdalene. It's a day that invites us to think about recognition, attention, and the mysterious power of being called by our name. To explore this, we're going to look at the famous garden scene in the Gospel of St. John and place it alongside the life and writing of the 20th century author P.L. Travers, the creator of Mary Poppins. Now, this might seem a slightly unexpected pairing, but bear with me on this. Both stories, in their own ways, suggest that the most profound truths of our lives rarely announce themselves with a trumpet blast. They may dress in ordinary clothes of daily life and wait patiently for us to notice them. The narrative of Easter morning in the 20th chapter of John's Gospel is steeped in the physical reality of grief. Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb early in the morning, while it is still dark, and she finds that the stone has been removed. She runs to tell Simon Peter and the disciple whom Jesus loved, as we are told in the Gospel. After the two disciples have visited the tomb and returned home, Mary remains behind. She stands outside the tomb weeping. Her sorrow is heavy, exhausting, and focused entirely on an absence, the missing body of her teacher. She has already witnessed his death, and now even the small comfort of caring for his body and knowing where he is has been taken away from her. She bends down and looks in the tomb, where she sees two angels. They ask her why she is weeping. "They have taken away my Lord," she tells them, "and I do not know where they have laid him." Then she turns around and sees a figure standing nearby. She doesn't recognize him. The text tells us with a beautiful simplicity that she supposes him to be the gardener. And it's an entirely understandable mistake. She is in a garden at daybreak, looking through a veil of tears. Her mind is prepared for the reality of death and the practical problems of burial. The figure asks her two questions. "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Mary asks this apparent stranger to tell her where the body has been taken. She's still searching for the Jesus she knew before the crucifixion. Her love is directed towards the past and towards the body she expects to find. Then Jesus speaks a single word, Mary. There is an immense power in hearing our own name spoken by a familiar voice. A name can be called impatiently across a crowded room. It can be printed impersonally on an envelope or entered into a computer system. It can also be spoken with such tenderness that it seems to contain the whole history of a relationship. The word remains the same. The recognition lives in the voice. Earlier in John's Gospel, Jesus describes the Good Shepherd as one who calls his own sheep by name. The sheep follow because they know his voice. Here, in the garden, that image becomes intensely personal. Mary recognizes the voice of the person who knows her, and in that single utterance, the vast distance of her grief collapses. She's drawn out of her isolation and restored to a relationship that she believed was lost. John records her immediate response in the Aramaic word Rabboni, teacher, or perhaps more intimately, my teacher. Mary's recognition doesn't come through a carefully reasoned argument. For example, she had just seen the two angels, and we don't kind of get her reaction to that really. But Jesus performs a sign to show her his wounds. She recognizes the particular way in which he speaks her name. And perhaps this is one reason our names matter so much. To be known by name is to be recognized as a particular person with our own history, our own sorrows, our loves, and our longings. It says, I see you. I know who you are. You haven't disappeared into the crowd. This is also a significant moment in the story of the resurrection. In John's Gospel, the risen Christ first reveals himself personally to Mary Magdalene. He then entrusts her with a task. She is to return to the disciples and tell them what she has seen and heard. Mary goes to them and announces, I have seen the Lord. For this reason, Christian tradition has called Mary Magdalene the Apostolorum Apostola, the Apostle of the Apostles. She is the person entrusted with carrying the news of the resurrection to those who will carry it into the wider world. In 2016, Pope Francis raised the liturgical celebration of Mary Magdalene to the rank of a feast, placing it at the same level as the celebration of the Apostles. The decision acknowledged her importance as the first witness to the risen Christ in John's Gospel and the first messenger of the Easter proclamation. That title, the Apostle of the Apostles, matters. A woman whose public testimony would have carried limited authority in the society around her is entrusted with the central message of the Christian faith. Her tears do not disqualify her. Her grief, devotion, and persistence are part of the person she is. She remains beside the tomb when the others have gone home and is there while she is still weeping that Christ calls her by her name. There is another intriguing detail in this story. John tells us that the tomb was situated in a garden. Now, Christian readers have long heard this setting, an echo of the garden in Genesis and suggestion of the creation and the all beginning again. Mary's assumption that Jesus is the gardener may therefore contain an unexpected poetic truth. He is not literally employed to tend the ground, of course, but in the deeper imagery of the story, the description seems strangely fitting. In this garden, life is beginning, where Mary expected only death. Something new is growing in the very place where all growth appeared to have ended. Almost 1900 years after Mary Magdalene's garden encounter, a young Australian writer and former actress named Helen Lyndon Gough arrived in England to pursue a literary life. By then, she was already known professionally as Pamela Lyndon Travers, or P.L. Travers. She had taken the name Travers from her beloved father, who had died when she was just a child. Travers became deeply immersed in poetry, myth, folklore, and spiritual traditions. Her father's Irish heritage drew her towards Celtic literature and the world of the Celtic revival. She became acquainted with the Irish poet and mystic George William Russell, who wrote under the name A.E., and through him entered a literary circle connected with writers, including W.B. Yeats. Later, Travers became closely involved with the teachings of the spiritual thinker G.I. Gurdjieff. She also explored Buddhism and Zen and a wide range of religious and philosophical traditions. Her best creation first appeared in the 1934 novel Mary Poppins. To many people, the name Mary Poppins conjures wonderful images of Julie Andrews, cheerful songs, and a spoonful of sugar. Travers' original character is a little bit different. The literary Mary Poppins is sharp, vain, occasionally stern, and deeply mysterious. She arrives at number 17 Cherry Tree Lane on the east wind, carrying a carpet bag that appears to contain almost nothing, and yet produces everything she needs. She is connected to a world that the adults around her cannot see. Extraordinary events occur in her presence. She slides up banisters, steps into pictures, converses with animals, and moves easily between the domestic world of the Banks family and a much older imaginative realm. Mary Poppins seldom offers an explanation. She frequently denies that anything unusual has happened at all, leaving Jane and Michael Banks to wonder whether they've just imagined it. Mary Poppins appears entirely comfortable with being misunderstood. Travers herself insisted that she had not consciously invented Mary Poppins. She described the first book as spontaneous, something that she hadn't really planned or even thought out in advance. Speaking about inspiration, she once said, "I cannot summon up inspiration. I myself am summoned." This idea is important. Travers saw storytelling as something the writer receives and encounters. The story arrives carrying a life of its own. The writer's task is to pay attention when it appears. Her books repeatedly suggest that mystery may be hidden in plain sight, folded into the domestic and the familiar. In one story, an entirely respectable cow discovers that a fallen star has become caught upon her horn. The presence of the star causes her to dance uncontrollably. It is a wonderfully comic image, a dignified cow dancing through the night because she's been touched by something celestial. It also has the lingering quality of myth. An ordinary creature encounters something from beyond the familiar and cannot quite immediately return to the former life. Travers's stories are full of crossings. Stars, animals, children, household objects seem to remember connections that sensible adult life has forgotten. Children can still perceive these connections, although their awareness begins to fade as they grow, which is a bit sad, isn't it? Mary Poppins stands at the threshold between these worlds, I think. She enters through the front door as a domestic employee. She takes charge of the nursery and makes sure that the children are properly dressed. At the same time, however, she belongs to the world of stars, of animals, of myths, and impossible journeys. Mary Poppins is not a disguised Christian figure and travels his spiritual world ranged widely across many, many traditions, but the connection with Mary Magdalene is one of imaginative resonance. Both stories ask whether our familiar categories are large enough to contain the reality standing before us. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is mistaken for someone employed to tend the soil. And in the suburban world of Cherry Tree Lane, a figure of ancient and mythic power is mistaken for an ordinary nanny. Both stories suggest that the divine and the mysterious may arrive wearing work clothes. The sacred enters the garden, the nursery, and the kitchen. It moves within our daily routines and among the people and objects that we think we know perfectly well. This realization can be both comforting and challenging. It suggests that we don't need to escape our lives in order to encounter what is meaningful. The invitation is to pay a different kind of attention to what is already before us. We might think of the moments when we have experienced this quiet recognition. It might happen during a conversation with a family member that we've begun to take for granted. For a moment, we see them afresh as a whole and separate person with memories and fears and an interior life that we can never completely know. It might happen in the garden when the simple act of pulling weeds creates enough quiet for a gentler truth to rise within us. And it might occur while making a drawing, or washing a cup, folding a piece of fabric, or just walking along a familiar path. Something catches our attention. A change in the light, the sound of a bird, the worn handle of a tool that we have used for many, many years. The familiar becomes visible again. Mary Magdalene's experience also reminds us that we don't have to make ourselves perfectly peaceful before recognition becomes possible. Mary is still weeping when Jesus comes to her. She has not resolved her grief or prepared herself for a spiritual revelation. She is met in the midst of her sorrow and her confusion. Sometimes a familiar voice reaches us there. It calls us by name and helps us to see what grief, anxiety, or habit has hidden. Perhaps attention begins with allowing the familiar to become visible again. The face across the breakfast table, the tree outside the window, the well-used cup beside us, the voice of someone we love. These things can become so thoroughly woven into our routines that we cease to encounter them fully. Mary Magdalene teaches us that recognition may arrive while we are still weeping. Mary Poppins reminds us that our ordinary world may contain doors we have forgotten how to open and to see. Both invite us to recover a patient form of attention, one that leaves room for the mystery and the memory and surprises. So perhaps the question for this week is very simple. What have you stopped noticing? And what might be calling your name quietly from the middle of the life you already have? Thank you so much for listening today. If you've enjoyed this little Wednesday wandering, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And perhaps leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. I would absolutely love to know whether you have ever discovered something deeply meaningful in the middle of doing something really ordinary and everyday. Have you experienced a moment of quiet recognition that perhaps changed the way you saw a person or a place in your own life? Next week, we will be wandering and wondering once again through the people, ideas, and stories that continue to shape our spiritual imaginations. Until then, take good care of yourself, and I'll see you very, very soon. Bye bye.